Yeah, what's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Prison Break Raw. I'm your host, the one and only Big JD. Go ahead, give the channel, subscribe, share, leave some messages or comments, hit that thumbs up for the like, notification bell to be informed on all episodes when they drop. Most importantly, if you enjoy this content, please feel free to share it. Sharing is caring. Share it to your family, your friends, your coworkers, anywhere and everywhere in your social media platforms. Let's get this raw and uncut material out there to the millions that don't know we are here. Since I have been in both the state prison system and the federal prison system, the CDC and the BOP, I get a lot of requests about doing a comparison, a side-by-side. Which one is better? Wouldn't it be better in the feds as opposed to being in the states? Some people honestly believe that the feds are like Club Med in some way. It's like sandals. And everybody's eating steak and lobster. You got golf courses and horseback riding and theaters and jacuzzis and hot tub, all these things. Unlimited soda fountains and unlimited coffee and all these things that you hear. The feds might have been sweet in a lot of those regards for a very long time, some time ago. However, it is not like that any longer. But is it better than the state at its worst? Or is it still basically just prison at the end of the day? It's basically just still prison at the end of the day. Bottom line is that you have a living situation where you are isolated from society, from the rest of the world, from your family, your loved ones, everyone. You are locked in a box and you are limited to what you can do and where you can go and how you can do it. Outside of slipping in contraband and doing all these other things that you do on the low, you basically ain't doing nothing in any prison because, well, you're in prison. But if we have to do a side-by-side comparison between doing time in the state prison as opposed to in the federal system, you also have to consider these factors. Every state in this country runs their prison system much differently than the next. Some are similar in a lot of ways. Most are very different in many different ways. Right? It depends on like where you're at. If you're going to be forced to run with your race, whether running with your race is not important. If you're going to be housed with only people that are of your race, or if you're just going to be put in there with the first bed that opens up and you could be in there with anybody. They'll throw a white supremacist in with a member of the Nation of Islam and so on and so forth. It depends on what state you are in. The only experience of a state prison that I have is the CDC, the California Department of Corrections and Rehumiliation, is the only experience I have to share with you the state side. But the BOP, it's the federal prison system that functions all over the country. So does it remain constant? Is it the same in every place? Well, the federal prison system runs differently depending on where you're at. No two prisons are exactly the same. But in general, all these things apply, and I will go through a list of 4 key points in dealing with from the moment you are arrested or indicted or charged with a criminal complaint to the moment that you are actually released and sent out, and how you discharge your paper and what jurisdiction you fall under, whether it be a parole department, the courts, probation, whatever it is. So let's go ahead and get into these right here with the first 4 key points and the differences between the California Department of Corrections and Humiliation and the BOP. So here's number 1. Sentencing and plea deals. What's the difference between sentencing and plea deals from the state to the feds? So here's how it works in the state. In California, how that is. When you are charged with a crime, you're basically arrested by some kind of a police department, sheriff's department, whatnot, and a criminal complaint is filed with the county clerk. So it is the people of the county of Los Angeles in the state of California versus Jason J.D. Rutherford. And what it is and how it works in that is that you have for lower felonies, it's 16 months, 2 years, 3 years. Unless, of course, you have a prior strike, those will double up. 16 months becomes 32 months. 2 years becomes 4 years. 3 years becomes 6 years. And you have to do that with 80 or 85%. All right, and other ones, they go higher and higher as that. Now the way it is, and this changed after I left the CDC, was if you got 3 years or less, you stay in the county. But if you got more than 3 years, you go to the state. So that is pretty much how it works in the state. Now, in the feds, it's much different. The feds have what's called the sentencing guidelines, and they've been doing this for some time now, but it wasn't always like that. That's why, like for a bank robbery, it says the maximum penalty is 20 years, right? However, it is not 20 years because it falls under the sentencing guidelines. And it's whatever is on that base offense goes down to 22 on your base offense, and then considering your priors, it goes across in the categories. Like if you have 2 or 3 prior felonies, your points will go up according to your category, and in that category, you'll have a range from, let's say, 54 months to 71 months. Now, there's no wiggle room between that. There is no plea bargaining like in the state. The DA can make an offer to the public defender or the state-appointed attorney or your personal attorney that you have saying, you know what, I'll give him 3 years if he signs right now, or I'll give him 2 years if he signs right now. The plea working out, your attorney will say, nah, let's give him 16 months, or if he's looking at 3, let's give him 2 years, and this and this and that. And there's some wiggle room going on there in the state. And it's up to the DA and the public defender or your attorney or whatever to come up with what that is, and then you sign that deal. And the judge usually goes along with it. Rarely ever, if ever, does a judge say, no, you know what, I don't like that, I'm going to give him my own time. Doesn't work like that in the California law system, in the system of law in California. Now, the feds, much different. There is no plea deal or plea agreement in the feds. You either accept responsibility or you do not accept responsibility. If you do not accept responsibility, you'll be indicted, of course, through a grand jury. Then you will go to trial. And when you go to trial, the feds have like well over a 95% success rate in convictions. So you don't really stand a snowball's chance in hell in beating them. Not even John Gotti, with the greatest attorney in the world, could beat the feds. Bottom line, they're good at what they do. They're thorough. They have your whole life written down. And there is no real, you can't beat them. So if you accept responsibility, here's what happens. Your base offense will deduct by a couple of points, so then it'll go up higher. And the higher it goes up, the more points off the base offense that it deducts, the lesser your time will be in your categories. So your category, let's say you accepted responsibility, you went down a couple of categories, now you're looking at 54 to 71 months. You plead guilty, you don't know what you're going to get. The prosecutor don't know, your attorney don't know, you don't know. There's only one person that knows, and that's that old decrepit judge that some president back in the 60s or the 70s appointed, and he's still up there in his 80s, maybe even have an oxygen tank on to keep him alive, who's going to decide your fate at that moment. But that's where how the feds work as opposed to the state. It's a plea deal in the state that your attorney will be working with the DA in the feds. The prosecutor only prosecutes when it goes to trial. Doesn't have really any say-so over what sentence you get. It's all in the matter. It's all up to the judge, and then you fall under probation in that system. All right, there's that. Number 2, custody levels. So custody levels in the state and in the feds are almost exactly the same. Not completely the same, but almost the same. It's in the state of California, you have the camp and the fire camp and the camp. You have level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 in the state. In the feds, you have minimum, which is a camp. You have a low, a medium, and a high. So in the state, right, a level 2 and a level 3 sometimes could be almost the same, depending on the setup. A lot of the mindset is the same. A lot of the same things go on in a level 2 and a level 3. And a level 4 is just straight high security all the way around. Most people think that a level 4 is a lot crazier because it's higher security, more people with more points. That's not necessarily always the case. Anytime I was in the CDC, I always saw that the level 3s and the level 2s always were a lot more rocking and rolling than a level 4. Now, that changes when you go to a 180 yard because a 180 yard is full of a bunch of disciplinary fuck-ups. So there's always going to be a lot of problems on a 180. And you got to be designated to a 180 to get there. But a level 4 yard, just a basic run-of-the-mill level 4 yard, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a lot more violent. Level 3s are always usually way more violent than a level 4. Contrast that to the federal system. So a low, which is equivalent to a level 1 or a camp, that's where practically nothing goes on there in the feds. It's smooth sailing. It's full of a bunch of diaper snipers and chomos and weirdos and all kinds of computer fraud and hackers and stuff like that. People that got caught up in embezzlement and fraud and all these things that were federal government officials and campaign finance reform, all that ends up in a low. Now a medium or a medium high, that would be the equivalent to a California level 3. That's where I landed. All cells, right? It's all cell living, so it's the equivalent of a level 3. And sometimes a lot of these FCIs is what they're called, actually go a lot harder than the USP. A USP would basically be considered a level 3 or a high level or a low level 4 or in a lot of ways, depending on which USP it is, a high would determine how much drama is going on there. You have places like Big Sandy and Hazleton that are always rocking and rolling. But then you have places like USP Allenwood or even USP like sometimes Canaan in some cases, or one of the Colemans because one of them is bad, that may not really be rocking and rolling. So USP doesn't really determine that it's going to be a rocking and rolling spot. It just means that there's a lot of more high notoriety type of people in there, people that got a lot more points. And in a lot of cases, a lot of fuck-ups that kept putting in all the work in the FCIs will end up in a USP, or people that are stepping down from the ADX or a SMOO program will end up in a USP. So those are the custody levels. Release, parole, or probation. Now here's a complete difference from the state and from the feds, but similar in a few different ways. So in the CDC, you get parole, 3 years of parole, and it's a determinate sentencing state, which means most of these other states like Texas, for example, is an indeterminate sentencing state. So let's say you get 5 years in Texas. You go in front of the parole board after 3 years. You'll do the rest of the 2 years that's remaining on your sentence on parole in Texas, or if you do all your 5 years, you just get out with no parole. Doesn't work like that in California. California is a determinate sentencing state. So if you get 3 years, you're going to do 3 years with 80%, or 3 years with 85%, or 3 years with half, or 35%, I guess they're doing in some cases now. You'll get out, and you will always have 3 years of parole, no matter what. You can't get around it. You can't max out your time and do all your time in there and not do your parole. You get 3 years of parole. But what I'm hearing now is that some people get like 6 months parole and they're off, depending on if you did it in the county or not. Like if you were one of those 3 years or under guys and you get out, you'll have 6 months of parole and you'll get out. I think that's how it works now. Of course, those are all new changes that happened after I left the system. When I was there, it was 3 years and 3 years only. The feds, same thing. The only difference is where you're being supervised by your parole officer under the DAPO, or the Department of Adult Parole Operations, out of whatever region you landed in California. It's your parole officer and your parole officer supervisor is pretty much the ones that have jurisdiction over you. In the feds, much different. You're under probation in the court. So your probation officer basically just babysits you for the judge. But anytime you violate, you have to go back to court and face that judge, the same judge that sentenced you, the same old decrepit dude that was appointed probably by Richard Nixon or Gerald Ford that's still in there to this very fucking day. That's going to be the person that'll decide your fate. It's not going to be a parole officer or a probation officer. It's always going to go to the courts anytime you violate. So that's the difference with that. And discharging your paper would be number 4 on this list of from pre-sentencing to post-sentence. And discharging your paper in California, you could do 13 months. your parole officer can put in to get you discharged, and it's up to your parole officer supervisor whether you get off. Feds, same thing, 13 months or basically half of your probation time. It's not up to the probation officer. It's up to the judge, once again. So the judge will decide if you're going to get out or not. Most of the time, they won't let you off early. Unless, of course, you're in New York or you're in California or some liberal state like that. You'll probably get off early, but don't hold your breath in most circumstances. So that's that. That is the difference between like the custody levels, the sentencing, and how everything falls from the state of California and the feds. Similar in a lot of ways, but not so similar in many other ways. But how about the prison system itself? The differences. I've come up with 10 key points to make in order to like show you the difference in both. So let's go ahead and get into those ones right there. Number 1, the yard, prison gangs, disruptive groups, and race. How does that work? So a lot of people ask me, if I go into the feds, is it the same as going into the state? Now, going into the state in California, like I said, we're talking about California prison systems. You go into the California prison system, chances are if you're not a gang member, you're not from nowhere, you're not running nothing, you're not doing nothing for anybody else outside the streets. You're just like, let's say you're just a regular, average, everyday black dude from wherever it is. You're gonna run like with the rest of the black dudes, the African-American dudes that are in there. Let's say you're just some regular white dude from, I don't know, Orange County. You're going to fall under the woods, and it's going to pretty much go according to like what county you run in. This is what I know for a fact. There's not one wood dude shot caller that rolls over all of the woods all over the place, because this shit breaks down according to county with a lot of the woods. If you're from San Diego, if you got a shot caller, he'll run that card. From Orange County, from IE, so on and so forth. There's not one guy running all of them, because it's not a prison gang and it's not a disruptive group. It's a racial designation in the federal prison system. It's a race group. But the prison gang system is something different. Prison gangs, I've said this before and I'll say it again, right? You don't have to join a prison gang when you go to the CDC. You don't have to join a prison gang when you go to the BOP. People that say this stuff have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, and they're feeding you a salad of lies and a bunch of misinformation in order to get some kind of views or to gain some kind of, I don't know what the fuck, but they're living in a fantasy land. They're living in some kind of Hollywood bullshit. Prison gangs are a organization that started in prison. Let's go ahead and just call it for what it is. A prison gang is an organization that started within prison. You're not going to just run right in there as a white dude and join the brand. It's just not going to happen. That's a prison gang. But you as a regular white dude don't have to join a prison gang. If you're a skinhead or if you're like a Nazi lowrider, if you're some kind of thing like that, doesn't matter if you're a peckerwood or not. If you don't fall under a disruptive group, you're not going to be in a prison gang. Even if you're in a disruptive group, you're still not going to be in a prison gang. You're going to be in a security threat group, a disruptive group. It's not a prison gang. It's a street gang that functions in the prison system and disrupts the normal operations. That's why they call them a disruptive group. A prison gang, you got to go through a whole slew of things and trials and tribulations and red tape just to become a member of a prison gang. So go ahead and count that one out. And a prison gang in the feds, same thing. You got to go through a lot to basically be classified as one. Now, a disruptive group, if you were a member of a disruptive group on the streets, you were a street gang member, anything like that, you'll fall into that disruptive group. Your race in the state, you'll run with your race. But I've heard people say that if you're a white dude, you got to go in there and run white dude, period. I don't give a fuck what you say. That's also bullshit, right? If you're a white dude and you're a sureño, you're from a barrio or something like that, like myself or many others, if a white dude was to come up to me and tell me you have to run white, I'd tell him how many different kind of ways he can go fuck himself, and I'd probably blast him right in his jaw. And I'm not alone. A bunch of other people would do the same thing. It would never happen because the minute they saw the tattoos and all this and this and that, they would say, oh yeah, my bad, homie, see you later, and they'd walk off. And that'd be the end of that conversation right then and there. In the feds, the same thing. Whatever gang you run from, whatever, if you're already from a prison gang or whatnot, you will fall in line with whatever that is. Now, your race in the feds, you don't have to run your race in the feds, at least not the places that I've been. Let's say, for example, you're a white dude again. I like to use the white dudes as an example because I know more about what goes on in their politics than on the other side because they're always a lot closer to Sureños, to whatever we are. They're always closer to us, so I know a lot about what goes on with them. So let's say you're just a white dude from California in the feds. You're going to run with the California white boy car. There's no one-shot caller ruling over all of them. You got the Texas car, you got the California car, the Utah car, the Oklahoma car, the Colorado car, on and on and on and on, and those people basically run themselves. And depending on what kind of a program they run, whether it be loose, lax, loosey-juicy, whatever it is, or it be strict, will depend on what state they're from and how they run their system or their program in the state that they come from. But can you be just a regular white dude and say, I don't do any of that stuff, I'm a Christian, I'm not about all that, where do I go? Well, in the feds, in the one that I was at Florence, FCI Florence, Colorado, there was an independent table. And you could be independent and sit at that independent table, and nobody will fuck with you. It's true, it happens. You're not going to have some guy walking up with all his tattoos, get off that table, you're running with us. That shit ain't going to fly. It doesn't work like that. If you choose to go that route, that's what you're going to do. A lot of people don't want to fuck up their time in there, so nobody's going to really trip on that if that happens. So there's that. All right. Another one that's big is our next one that we're going to talk about. Paperwork. Let me see your paperwork, homie. You've heard several different takes on paperwork, people shoving it up their ass, shoving it down their throat, in their ear, wherever they could stuff it and fit it and squeeze it into, they'll do that. And I've done a paperwork video and I've done a parody video on paperwork and all these other things. And here's the difference between paperwork in the state and the feds. Okay, so your paperwork in the state, the CDC. A lot of people want to know about that. When are you going to shove it up your ass? How are you going to shove it up your ass? And what are you shoving up in your ass in California, since we're talking about paperwork in the ass? Okay, I've heard some people say that they mini write it down or they shrink it down and mini write it, whatever. I've heard that a million times. Never seen that as being an acceptable document, not in my car or to any of my people. If you got something that ain't the actual physical document, 9 out of 10 times it's not going to be accepted as valid. It's not going to do you any justice. So if you're bringing me something that's written and handwritten, or it's all shrunk down into a little tiny piece of paper, and you bring it to me, I'm not going to accept it. I want to see the physical document that you have every way in your power to get to you. You can either request it from your counselor, you can request it from your attorney, and you have a certain amount of time in order to get that paperwork to me. Until then, you're probably going to just be okay, you're going to be sitting there, but you probably won't be involved in a lot of anything going on until you've been 100% given the thumbs up. And I've heard that working up north. I've heard that in several other cars. Mine, I've seen it time and time again. People will come in with 2 or 3 sheets of paper from God knows what and say, oh, here's my paperwork. Get that shit out of here and go get me your 128G. You'll get your 128G after you go see the committee. And that's how it works. Somebody coming straight out of reception telling me they're pulling their paperwork out of their ass, I find it hard to believe because you don't get a 128G in your reception. You get a legal status summary sheet. That's about it. You may have your police report, but unless you were only sniffing bicycle seats down at the local playground, you're probably going to have a police report that's about that thick. Good luck shoving that up your ass. So more than likely, your car is going to wait until you get your 128G, or you can get on that horn and call your attorney and have all your police report mailed to you. It's that simple. Or your police report will already be with you in your property. There's that. But the 128G, you get that. It's given to you. You're entitled to that under CDC, the Title 15, the rules. You are allowed to have your 128G. Now, if you're going from one main line to the next, you probably will shove it up your ass in that circumstance there. Or if you're coming from AdSeg and you got a 114D lockup order and your 128G, you're probably going to shove both of those pieces up your ass when you go somewhere else so somebody shows that you weren't banged off the yard. There's that, okay? I hope that cleared that up because you had a lot of people out there that got all fucking upset about that one. But that's the paperwork in the state. The paperwork in the feds, you are not allowed to have your paperwork in the feds. And I don't give a fuck what any of you tell me, right? I've had people when I was on Josh's show, I had my paperwork in the feds. Well, good for you. You were able to smuggle it in some way, somehow. Maybe they let you smuggle it in some way, somehow, and the paperwork's not even real, but you're some kind of a government plant. Because the rules, the law, under Homeland Security, John Ashcroft, all that stuff, said you cannot have your pre-sentencing report in your possession on a federal compound. Why? Because the only reason why you have a pre-sentencing report, now this is your federal driver's license, by the way, is that pre-sentencing report, that PSI. The reason why you're not allowed to possess that on a federal yard is because that paperwork is solely used for the probation department, for the prosecutor, for the judge to determine what sentence you're going to give. That's why it's called a pre-sentence report. It's not your legal status or your rap sheet, even though it has all that in there. That PSR is solely for the judge and the prosecutor. That's it. And for your attorney to argue certain points. It's not meant to be a driver's license like your 128G is. It's a pre-sentencing report. So you're not allowed to possess it when you're on a federal yard. However, if you are appealing your case, you can request that your PSR be put on a microfilm, a disc, and when you go to the law library, you could stick it in and review it while you're appealing your case and have your homies look at it then, but you're not going to make copies of it and take it back to the yard. That's what you're not going to do. No. If you're found in possession of that PSR, you can actually be removed, put in the shoe, and sent somewhere else. I've seen them do it. People try to smuggle it in, and I showed you in one of my earlier videos just how much you are not going to shove your PSI up your ass. Good luck with that. I hope you have a very deep anal cavity because you've probably been getting fist fucked for some time somewhere, but you're not going to fit that shit up in your ass. Sorry to tell you. It's not going to happen. All right, so that's that. But like I said, there are ways you can check people out in the feds. I'm not going to expose game and tell you how it's done. Just know that it's done. That's all you really need to know. Having your physical paperwork on a federal yard and shoving it up your ass doesn't fly in the feds. You might be able to get away with it in California. The feds, you're not. So let's move on to the next one. Number 3, lone wolf. I think I already covered that in the last one. If you want to be a lone wolf and run independent, you could do that in some federal joints. Other federal joints you can't. If you get into a USP like Big Sandy or Tucson or USP Victorville or Pollock or USP Beaumont or someplace like that and you want to run the lone wolf thing, chances are you probably won't be able to do it. They'll probably tell you you're running with us. Your register number, the last 3 numbers on your federal registry number, basically says where you landed. And if you have a 177 number, chances are you landed out of West Texas. The West Texas boys are saying you're running with us. So yeah, it works like that in the feds, according to Lone Wolf. In a low or in an FCI somewhere where they have an independent table, you could do that. Most USPs, good luck trying to do the Lone Wolf thing. Just giving you the facts, man. All right. Number 4, food. Which is better? CDC food? BOP food. You would think that once upon a time in the feds, the food was great. You've heard it before. It's like Club Med, right? Steak and lobsters, big old giant fudge cakes and pints of ice cream, Ben & Jerry's, soda fountains, unlimited coffee, all that fun stuff. Guess what? All gone. Not even like that anymore. Thanks to Michelle Obama and the national menu that the feds are now under, we eat a bunch of slop, the same or it's equivalent to the state. We eat all the same chili con carne, chili conquistador, chili Colorado, turkey a la king, tuna a la king, all the slop, the same chicken, the same dehydrated, protein patty that they try to call a burger, turkey burgers that taste like cardboard, a chicken piece that's like this big, right? But it's got a big bruise in the middle from where they were jamming the steroids into it. All that kind of stuff is what we get now. And funny and strange and tinfoil hat-ish that Michelle Obama actually has stock in a lot of these distribution companies that supply the federal prison system. Who would have thought, right? But yeah, the food is pretty much the same as it is in the state now. You probably get a little bit more of it in the feds, but the food's the same as opposed to the state and the feds, food's the same. All right, number 5, programs, jobs, and recreation. Programs in the state, pretty much the same as in the feds. Jobs, in the feds, the one advantage that the feds had is they had Unicor, right? Unicor, you start out making like 90 cents an hour, and you could work up as high as like, I think it's $3.15 or $4 an hour. Now imagine, you're working 8 hours in a Unicor factory making that much money. You actually have more money after all your living expenses are paid, of which is paid for by federal tax dollars. You don't have an electricity bill. You don't have a cable bill. You don't have a water bill. That money that you got, which is $200, $300, $400 every month from Unicor, that's all cream. That's all profit. You could spend that any way you want. So you get that. In the state, you get like a PIA job. If you're fortunate enough to land at a state prison that has PIA, then you'll have a PIA pay number, which I think they start at, 30 cents, 40 cents, all the way up to 90 cents is the max for a lead man position. But if you're not working in PIA, you're making like 8 cents or 9 cents an hour slinging a mop somewhere in some hallway. In the feds, if you're slinging a mop somewhere in the hallway, you're making about 30 cents an hour doing that, slinging that mop. So the money in the programs is probably the jobs is a lot better. The recreation, in California, they took away the weights back in 1998. In the feds, they've been taking the weights slowly but surely over the last several years. FCI Florence had a full weight pile, 2 weight piles, huge weight pile. FCI El Reno still has a weight pile. The weight pile in FCI Florence, they took it away. Why? Because some pussy-ass inmate grabbed a fucking 25-pound plate and hit somebody else with it upside the head. So they took the weights. But they had them for a long time, and some prisons have them. Most do not anymore. So the recreation's pretty much the same. Number 6, Canteen and Commissary. Canteen is what they call it in the state. Commissary is what they call it in the feds. Now, when I left the CDC, the maximum draw was, I think it was $200 or $240 or something like that was the maximum draw. I heard it's higher now, a draw a month, but in the feds, your max draw is $290 a month. But you could break that down into 4 draws, or you could just take it all out at once. Some people take it all out at once, leave maybe about $20 or $30 to get maybe ice creams or something here and there along the way. But for the most part, that's how the commissary and the canteen is much different in that way. The canteen in the state, you draw like $240, you're going to get that whole draw, and you could go to a makeup draw and spend, old money. If you have $10 or $15 left, you could spend that out at the end of the month. The feds, you don't have to worry about that. Number 7, packages, TVs, and personal property. The CDC is, you used to be able to get your package from your family. Your family could build that package, could buy a bunch of cheap stuff at like Buy for Less or the 99-cent store and make a nice package for a cheap amount of money. But how they did it now is a bunch of as the key turns type motherfuckers, retired correctional officers, set up a racket, a cartel of sorts, a package and property cartel, companies called Access and Walkenhurst and Union Supply, to where they sell all their shit to you. Your package comes through a vendor now. But you get that like every quarter. So there's 4 quarters in a year, so you get 4 quarterly packages a year. The feds, you get no packages whatsoever. You buy all your shit in the commissary, and that's it. That's all. TVs, you can have your own TV in your cell in the state, CDC. In the feds, you cannot have your own TV. If you don't have a radio or an MP3 player that can tune in to the frequency that the TVs are on, you won't even be able to hear that motherfucker. So you better have a radio in the feds in order to even hear the TVs. But you got cable TV in the feds. In the state, you don't have cable. So there's that. Number 8, housing assignment, cell assignment. Do they sell you up by race? We already know they do this in the CDC. But do they do that in the feds? And it's always the feds that are crying about how the CDC segregates race. Well, here's a funny thing that I learned when I went into the federal prison system. They do the same exact shit. They do the same exact thing. They separate by race. You'll go right into a cell according to your race. They knew what I represented. They knew what my jacket said that I was according to my PSR, according to my CDC file. Being an active sureño and all that, gang member, all that shit. They rolled me right in the cell with some fucking tobacco chewing redneck from like goddamn Mississippi or something. And it was cool. I didn't mind it. I basically said, you know what? I think I'm in the wrong cell. I got to get with my people. I explained it to him. He said, oh, yeah, they do that all the time. So, boom, they just rolled me right in the cell with the homie Shadow that fell out of Orange County. So we got that resolved like within a couple of hours. But the feds do the same shit. Hypocrites when they're trying to tell California not to segregate, but they segregate in their prison system the same. Just saying, right? So number 9, phone calls, mail, and visits. Phone calls in the CDC. If you don't have a cell phone, which most everybody does now, more people have cell phones in the CDC than they do in the feds. A little bit harder to get phones in the feds than it is in the CDC. It happens, but not as frequently as it does in the CDC. But if you are one of those people that don't have a cell phone and you're at the mercy of Global Tel-Link, which charges about $20 a phone call to talk to your family, you'll have a better advantage at phone calls than the feds because they don't go through Global Tel-Link. They go through their own system, and you could load as much money as you want onto your phone using your PAC number, your CoreLinks number, and stuff like that. You could load $300 onto your phone, and if it's not a local call, right, it's like $1.20 for 15 minutes. If it's a local call, it's like 90 cents a call, 15 minutes. That goes a long ways. If you put like $30, $40 on there, you could talk to your family, and there's no sign up for the phones in most places in the feds. You just get on the first phone that opens because you enter in your code and all that stuff like that. So that's how they keep track of your phone calls. All your calls are automatically recorded into your file, and they could pull them up at any given time, so they don't need to sign you up for the phones in the Fed. So there's the advantage with that. Mail, you get mail sent to you like regular mail in the Feds, the same as you do in the state. The only difference between the mail system in the Fed and the state is in the Feds you have email. The state you do not. And again, you upload minutes, however many minutes, onto your CoreLinks account into the computer system, and you can access those emails. If you don't have any points on there, you're not going to access your email. You can also upload songs and purchase songs with those same points onto your MP3 player on that same computer. So there's that. And the visits. Visiting in the Feds as opposed to visiting in the state. I would rather be in the state for visiting than I would be in the Feds. In the Feds, you have to sit so far apart from each other, you can't even touch each other at all, period. You can't touch them. You can't touch their hands, do anything like that. You have to be completely separated from them, and that's your visit. You could walk around and get some food in there or something, but you can't really touch anybody. You could kiss them at the beginning of the visit. You can kiss them at the end. And a lot of places in the CDC, when I've been in visiting, I've seen people smooching and kissing all through there all the time, holding hands, a little sliding a finger up under the table, give your old lady a little whirl or something like that out when nobody else is watching, out in the outdoor visiting section. And then you have family visits in the CDC. In the Feds, you ain't getting no kind of chon in a 72-hour visit of any kind. So there's that. I saved the best for last in all of this, and goddamn, it's a 40-minute video. But I saved the best for last. Are there any PC prisons or S&Y prisons in the feds? We already know they exist in the CDC, so we don't need to say here and there. The feds, there's no such thing as S&Y in the federal system. There's really no such thing as a PC prison in the feds. Whitey Bulger proved that. Because here's a dude that was a rat for the longest, and they sent him to Rockin' and Rollin' Hazleton to be killed. That would never happen in the CDC. They would never take Boxer Enriquez and drop him like right in the middle of active Salinas Valley just because they didn't like him. They wouldn't do that to anybody. And all the 50-50 yards and all that bullshit, they only usually pick a lot of softer type of people to go onto these 50-50 yards, or people they think is soft to go on them. But the feds don't have anything like that at all, right? They have Coleman, I think it's either Coleman 1 or Coleman 2, and Terre Haute that has people that are like witnesses or people that got some hits on them. In that case, yes, they'll have a designated spot for those people. People that will be going into WITSEC, whatnot, people that have righteous hits on them that the BOP knows about, they'll go to a place like a Terre Haute or a Coleman, but there's no S&Y. There's no, I want to drop out or anything like that and go to this sensitive needs prison. You want to drop out in the feds? How they're going to drop you out is they're just going to drop you on another federal yard somewhere else. And you'll just bounce around and bounce around and bounce around and keep getting beat up, whacked, stabbed, beat the fuck up and all that from one spot to the next. Until maybe someday somebody wises up and has a heart and puts you on a low, in which case you'll probably never have another problem again. So these are the differences between the California Department of Corruptions and Rehumiliation and the BOP, BOP. Bop you with a whole lot of time. Prison Break Raw, uncut, uncensored, no holds barred, not sugarcoat, not politically correct, all up in your face, slapping you with that dick of reality, and I'm out.